Okay, it looks like we've started. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am Tracy Fernandez-Rashavi. I'm the editor-in-chief with Green America, and I'm really pleased to be talking with two incredible women who are featured in our latest issue of the Green American, Drinking Water at Risk. So if you haven't gotten to that issue yet, we looked at different ways people are fighting for clean water or fair access to it. So that issue featured both Catherine Coleman Flowers, who works on the environmental justice issues related to sewage, and our digital exclusive from that issue featured We the People of Detroit, which is headed by Monica Lewis-Patrick, who is also with us today, although we're having some technical difficulties. I hope we can resolve them and have her join us here on the virtual stage. So Monica and her organization work on fair water access. So we have some new webinar technology, and only two of us can share the stage at a time. So how we're going to run this webinar is that I'll introduce our first speaker, which was Catherine, and Catherine and I will talk about her work, and then I'll ask you to hold your questions, as hopefully I will be able to pull in the second speaker, Monica. She and I will chat about her work, and then we will take questions. You'll be able to see a field to the right where you can enter your questions. And we'll probably have to do those one at a time as well to keep from having to toggle back and forth between everybody. So that's how we're doing things. And we're going to start with Catherine Coleman Flowers. We featured Catherine in our water issue in an article called What Sewage Have to Do with It. And Catherine is the founder of the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise Community Development Corporation, a big mouthful that she shortens down to ACRE. ACRE seeks to address the root causes of rural poverty and is really heavily working on sewage. She also serves as the Rural Development Manager for the Equal Justice Initiative and as Director of Environmental Justice and Civic Engagement for the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. She says her goal is to expose America to the third world conditions that exist in southern rural communities, which she has characterized as America's dirty secret. If that makes her sound like a busy lady, she is. In a lot of ways, she's a one-woman show shining a light on a problem that I think many people would be surprised to learn is happening across the U.S., which is a lack of access to working sewage systems in rural communities. And there's some real environmental justice and equity issues around this too. She, in December of 2015, she represented the Center for Earth Ethics in Paris as an official observer at the climate talks, COP21. And in 2016, she was chosen to attend the White House Water Summit. She has a master's degree in history and is a practitioner in residence at Duke University's Franklin Center for the Humanities. She's a member of the board of the Climate Reality Project. She was named a member of the 2017 GRIST 50 for her environmental work. And she was recently named one of the 2017 Women Who Shape Alabama. She's the mother of a daughter and a grandparent, and her objective is to leave a better world for her grandson and 7 generations into the future. So welcome, Catherine. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. She was just cruising into DC today for a talk that she was giving, so we're really grateful to her for squeezing us in here. So Catherine, many people think of a lack of sewage systems as a developing world problem, as you said, as we said in your bio. But here in America, there are many people without proper sewage systems in their homes. They either have outhouses, a drain pipe that runs into the woods, or septic tanks that perpetually flood their homes. Can you talk a little bit about that? How is this happening in the U.S.?
Well, I think because these rural issues have never been addressed. Even now, since I've been doing this work lately, a number of people have introduced legislation or have sent me proposed bills to deal with this. And one of the things that has become increasingly clear is that a lot of people don't understand rural America, and they don't even understand the terminology related to rural America. So when people come to Lowndes County, Alabama, which is located between Selma and Montgomery, to learn about the raw sewage issue, I have to, first of all, kind of give them an orientation to living in a rural community. Lowndes County is 714 square miles. In some places, you're not going to get a phone signal. A lot of people think they can use GPS or they can put the address in and find it. It's just not like that in some areas. So such is the same thing with the wastewater treatment. There's never been a concerted effort, I believe, to address wastewater treatment in these rural communities. So, and even where they did have municipal systems initially, they were only for a certain segment of the community, and they were not for people of color. So when they added on to those municipal systems, they added on to something that was not set up to accommodate everyone in the town, and as a result, they're having problems now. And then we have people that have they cannot afford the on-site septic systems because what the health department, the Alabama Department of Public Health, controls that, and they regulate it. And what they require is a certified system with an installer that they have to approve. And once these systems are installed, and they're very expensive, once they're installed and they fail, it's still on the homeowner. The homeowner is still left holding the bag. And we've seen more than, I mean, it's just so, it's awful, especially when it rains. It's starting to rain more because the climate is changing. And people are seeing these systems flood their homes. And then the third problem that we found are people that are straight, besides the people that pay for the systems, we have people that are straight piping. Straight piping means that the houses come with the plumbing and it's going directly out on top of the ground. So, and then some of those people who've had the flooding coming, have the systems flooding coming into their homes, usually through a bathtub, sometimes it comes through the sink. And what they've done to relieve it in some cases, they have a valve or something there to make sure that if it backs up, they can relieve it, and it's going out on top of the ground as well. So what we're trying to do is not only expose this issue, because it's exposing people to diseases, and this is not something that has just started. It's been here for years. So we're hoping that ultimately we can find solutions. So as we work on exposing the problems, we've been also working with some entities on potential solutions.
Okay. So I live in Wisconsin and telecommute for Green America, and I actually have a septic system as well. What is it about Alabama and some of these areas across the states that makes these not work?
Because of the soils. I mean, what happens, this is a big country, and I think that even when we talk about language and diverse languages, we talk about regions, or we talk about rural communities versus urban communities, people don't want to acknowledge that one template doesn't work in all places, because we have to look at the soils. According to Alabama's history, as people well know, it used to be, had a plantation culture. Because the soils were growing things, because they hold water. It's not septic systems for the same reason. But once the soil gets saturated, it will only hold so much water. Once it gets to that point, then it's going to push it back to the house.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have. Oops.
Yeah, and what we've seen people actually, when they know, because they start seeing the symptoms to suggest that it's going to come back into the house. There are some people that are even, instead of putting toilet paper in their toilets, they have a separate bucket that the toilet paper goes into, and they dispose of it in the trash. I mean, people should not have to look like this at this time in this country, because I think we have the technology to find the answer. It's not the toilets. You know, we know that it's not the toilets, it's the on-site treatment, and we need to find something that will work in that area, as opposed to people assuming because it works in other places, it can work in our areas. But there are areas of the Southeast and other parts of the United States too that have certain soils that are not conducive to on-site wastewater treatment.
And then they're just also too far out for city water and city sewage to get to them, correct?
Yeah, a lot of them have, a lot of them do have water, because USDA provided funding at a point in our history that took water to most places. Everybody doesn't have water. Some people still have their own wells. For those that do, it makes perfect sense to find a solution where the people that are receiving water can also receive on-site wastewater treatment.
Okay. There is an environmental justice element to this issue as well, and particularly in Alabama where you live. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where are the inequities coming in?
Well, a lot of the inequities are coming in because of the way they criminalize this in Alabama. So if you can't afford an on-site septic system, people can be prosecuted. They could be they can be charged up to $500 per day. That's a glaring example of inequality, where we know there are business people who are prominent in the community that have businesses that have the same problem, but those people are not being prosecuted. That's one thing. And then we also saw, in terms of those areas where they do have municipal systems, they're building lagoons in communities near where families live. One family that we've been working with, and we've raised up their story often, recently they just had their home flood because when there's a lot of rain, the lagoon is only going to hold so much water. A lot of this is common sense. It's only going to hold so much water, and then it's going to eventually start pushing stuff back into people's homes. So those are, and all of these people that we're working with are people of color. The way the problem is addressed, the way the government gets involved in solving it, even to the point where we did a study and we found that some people in various parts of the counties showed evidence of tropical parasites, including hookworm. But recently, an award was made to a town in Lowndes County to connect the business community to on-site wastewater treatment, but that has not been done with the residents that are suffering.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about, and this example did appear in the Green American, but we may have people who didn't see the article yet or see the magazine. So there was Bishop Ira McLeod, and I love the name of the church. He's the pastor of the Jesus Christ Church of God, the Bible Way of the Apostolic Faith in Brundage, Alabama. What happened with Bishop McLeod?
Well, Bishop McLeod's congregation purchased a church in Brundage, Alabama. It was located on a major highway that goes to Florida, 231. And when they purchased the church, apparently whoever sold it to them had separated the septic system from the field lines. So that after they had been in the church, then the person on the adjoining property started complaining because their sewage was coming onto his property. He went to the health department and filed a complaint against the church. Meanwhile, the church officials hired engineers. They tried to do whatever they could to resolve the problem. And one of the things they wanted to do was connect to city sewer. Mm-hmm. Actually, who filed the complaint had the public sewer main was on his property, and he would not allow them to do it. The health department officials went and filed for a warrant for the arrest of the bishop. He was arrested. And the case was thrown out on a technicality because the bishop didn't have the authority to make any decisions. But in the meantime, hire a local attorney and sue for an easement right to be able to connect to the city sewer. The crazy part about this is, why would they put all that effort into arresting him instead of facilitating his connecting to the city sewer? And the person who filed the complaint had the main on his private property that he needed to connect to. So is that kind of blatant corruption and inequality that we should not have at this date? Because at the end of the day, it was risk for. And also we have Bishop McLeod has an arrest on his record. He's 58. He was 58 years old at the time and never been arrested before in his life. It made absolutely no sense.
Right. And he's being arrested for not installing a system that's pretty much not going to work and going to fail, which could lead to him being arrested again.
Yes. And not only that, that particular area has access to municipal sewer. Right. Instead of the state facilitating him connecting to the municipal system, they fought the person who had the sewer main that he needed to connect it to. They partnered with the person who had the sewer main on his land to pursue this man criminally, as opposed to just helping facilitate the church connecting to this. So it shows that it doesn't matter whether you're a church, individual, homeowner, whatever. People are treated differently when it comes to these things, instead of trying to find a working solution for everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I want to go back. You had mentioned the Baylor study that found 34% of the county of Lowndes County residents tested positive for hookworm. An intestinal parasite can cause anemia, fatigue, impaired mental function. So what to you is the significance of that finding? It was shocking to me.
It's shocking because hookworm was something that should have been wiped out, or according to the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission that had the study in the first half of the last century, it should have been worked out at that time. Actually, the Rockefeller Foundation evolved from the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission. So this is something you tend to find in poor communities around the world, not in the U.S., which has one of the wealthiest economies in the world, but you tend to find it in poor communities, and they tend to be found in third world countries. So what's shocking about this is that this is in plain sight on the Selma to Montgomery March Trail that people visit every year, that business people, public officials, presidents even have gone there, and where people are suffering from these injustices, and nobody has addressed it yet.
Right. So you've been traveling the country, documenting similar problems, and what are you finding? And what is your overall goal with all of this information that you're compiling?
What we found is that this is a South in terms of the raw sewage issue. I've been to conferences around, as you said, around the country, and I've been told that in some parts of New Jersey and some parts of the Chesapeake Bay area, Virginia. I actually saw it in some parts of Virginia where people were straight piping. West Virginia. I addressed a conference for the National Rivers Alliance, and there were people that represent 11 states, and they came from all over the United States, including Alaska, that were at my workshop, and they had all seen examples of that. I've been called by a journalist, actually, who told me that he was poor and white and grew up in Missouri in a mobile home, and underneath their mobile home was raw sewage. So this is a problem throughout the United States, but I think because it's in rural America, been overlooked, but I'm hoping that we could use what's going as a case study to raise this issue and finally find a 21st century solution to this problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how is climate change worsening the situation?
Well, I think climate change is worsening the situation because as it gets warmer, we're going to have warmer days, and these parasites are going to be able to live further and further north. So that's one way in which it's worsening condition. The other way in which conditions are worsening is the rain. Getting so much rain, and it's getting to the point where as people get rain, especially deluges of rain, not even sometimes, like, we had because we're in the Gulf Coast region, we're impacted sometimes by hurricanes or tropical storms, but even just a regular rain problems, because the ground gets saturated really, really fast. And as a result, people are having more and more problems. And the rainy season now is past, it would have been September now, we're going into November. People are telling us about problems they're having even in December. We've had, I remember a couple of years ago, Christmas Day, it was 80 degrees. We used to have 4 seasons in Alabama. We really got a lot of snow, but it got cold. It did get below freezing, but we have fewer and fewer of those days. I have palm trees growing in my yard now. When I first moved back to Alabama, I had to cover them every winter. So those things are really, really clear that the climate is changing, but the way it impacts the problem is that it makes it harder for us to address it. People are having more problems where it's been pushed into their homes. And the current technology that they're telling people to use, it does not take into account the changes in the climate.
Mm-hmm. So you've been working on this issue for 17 years. What gives you hope now that you can find something to help?
Well, I have hope because a number of potential partners have come forward, just first of all, to investigate, to see what's going on. We're going to announce some partnerships in terms of an on-site wastewater challenge to try to find the technology that works. We're even looking at how do they treat wastewater in outer space? I think we have to think out of the box in terms of how we deal with this. We cannot use the same old ways in which we've been doing to try to address it. A lot of people, we talk about these areas, they also have high water tables. We've been to some areas where they did a perk test and they dug down 6 inches and struck water. So we're working with various entities. There's even a private company, which is a major international corporation that has stepped forward. They're not ready to announce yet, but they're investigating whether or not they can help find the technologies that work. So I am very, very hopeful. The fact that I'm here, and people, we're talking about it now. 17 years ago, I was told nobody's interested in that because it's not sexy. Who wants to talk about that? It's nasty, but it's a reality, you know, and people realizes that everybody would have these issues if they did not, if they lived in some of the same areas, the same conditions, people would have these kinds of issues. So in modern day America, I think we have what it needs to solve it. Now I think that people are closer to having the will to do it.
Okay. You might have seen me smiling when we talked for the article. You were just kind of talking about, I'd like to do a wastewater challenge. I'd like to get a corporate partner. So to hear that this is actually, these announcements are coming is incredible. So kudos to you, Catherine. That's great. I did tell everyone to hold their questions, but we did get a couple in, so I might as well just ask them now, and then we'll bring Catherine back on after we talk with Monica as well. But right now, we have Kathy asking, has anyone used composting toilets as a temporary solution?
No, no, we have not used composting toilets as a temporary solution. I think that culturally, we talked about composting toilets when it worked 17 years ago. But one of the things that the people that came to a community gathering what they described was not very different from what people had when they had outhouses. And we got to keep in mind that a lot of people, especially in Lowndes County, when I grew up, people still had outhouses. So a lot of people didn't move to indoor toilets until the 80s. So that wasn't too long ago. And what they were describing was akin to that. So I don't know what the current technologies are, but we're looking at all technologies to see what potential solutions are.
Okay. Kathy also asked, is there a successful organizing tactic your community has used to address these issues, other than sending you everywhere and beyond?
Well, I think that's been the organizing tactics that's been successful. I mean, it's always been a problem in the community. Nobody addressed it until we left the community and started talking about it. So as long as it was a secret, nobody wanted to deal with it. Now it's not a secret anymore. Now we have people coming to our aid and trying to help.
Great. Before the webinar, someone asked us another question. They said, I work for Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. Can you share what, if any, role the faith community has played in strengthening you personally and or your work for environmental justice?
Well, the faith community has been very, very helpful to me, especially we have faith partners from around the country through my affiliation with Union Theological Seminary. And I'm also doing some work with Duke University and Duke's School of Theology. Their Divinity School has gotten involved with students that are actually working with us on finding solutions. I guess I need to mention that I am a practitioner in residence for Duke's Franklin Humanities Institute. And there I'm working with at least 30 students across disciplinary areas, from undergraduate, graduate, even law students, in terms of trying to find solutions. And we're also working with Baylor's National School of Tropical Medicine, who we did the study with, to do additional studies to see what type of, it could be a bellwether for the types of illnesses that people are suffering with as it relates to being exposed to raw sewage. So the faith community, the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary has been extremely, extremely helpful in terms of connecting us to people, and also providing sometimes just the guidance and the type of meditation that we need to be able to do this work.
Okay. Mark asks, are there incentives in your area that local governments offer to help residents on impacted properties leverage grant funding to develop rain gardens as a mitigation strategy? So any grant funding for rain gardens as a mitigation strategy?
No, we're not. So we're not aware of it. I know not through the local governments. The areas where a lot of this is prevalent is primarily rural communities that are in the Black Belt region. Now, Montgomery, Alabama has the same kind of soil as we have, but they have a municipal system, so they don't have the problem. That have the problem, especially rural communities, they don't have the tax base to even be able to grant. Most of them come to mitigate on-site wastewater problems would come SDA, and it's very expensive. I haven't mentioned that people could pay up to $30,000 just for an engineered on-site treatment system.
Okay.
And then the other option would be through the state revolving loan fund that comes through the Alabama Department of Environmental Management. That money comes from EPA, and they decide the state decides where it goes. And as of, today, they haven't decided to deal with that. And there are some states that actually make loans to the homeowners themselves. They don't do that in Alabama. And we have gotten funding in the past to actually install septic systems. And the people that helped us were some of the academic experts and people that were working with the Alabama Department of Public Health, and those systems also failed.
Okay. Last question from Kristen, and then I will bring you back on after we talk with Monica, Catherine. But Kristen wanted to know, are there any soil remediation strategies that have worked, and how can we get the word out more?
I don't know of any soil remediation strategies that work. Before, what the state was suggesting is that as part of these engineered systems, that they would bring in what they call good soil and put it on top of the bad soil, and that's where the bed and the fill lines and all that would go, as well as the septic system. But what they didn't factor in is that we have erosion. If it's raining a lot and our soil moves, it expands and contracts. I mean, a lot of homes in our areas either have cracks in the foundations or whatever, because the soil does expand and contract. The current solutions don't take any of that into account. That is part of the problem. So we need to go back to the drawing board and reverse engineer this and figure out how do we get something that will work. And what was the second part of the question?
She just wanted to know how people can help get the word out more about your work.
I think that, one of the ways you can get the word out is actually go to, we have a Facebook page for the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise. You can go there, like our page, and get information as we post updates. There's going to be more happening in the media where we're going to be talking about this and exposing it to the rest of the U.S. I think most people in the United States don't know about this. We've been also inviting people to come and see firsthand so they can articulate and understand what's going on. If you're an expert and you feel like you have the answer, let's talk about it and let's see what we can possibly do to test it. Because at this point, since I've been doing this work for so long, I know instead of just supporting a solution and saying this is the solution, and then people use it and it doesn't work, we want to pilot and test. We want to pilot and test and see if it'll work. Because if we find something that can work in Lowndes County, it has to be take into account climate change. It has to be affordable. It has to be sustainable. And our goal is to come up with technology that you can go to the Lowe's and the Home Depot and buy like you buy an HVAC system. Hire a technician to install it, and it works. We're talking about thinking about this a different way and coming up with a solution that does put the answer in the hands of the homeowner.
Okay. All right. Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Catherine. Like I said, we'll bring you back for more questions if people have them after we talk with Monica. So thanks so much. All right. Now I get to see if I can get Monica on here. One moment, everybody. So I've invited Monica, and Monica, you just have to hit accept the invitation, which I think is happening. Okay, here she comes. Hi, Monica.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Well, thank you for joining us. I know you're in the middle of a conference, so really appreciate you working us in here.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a conference, and today was the last day of our citizens-based research water testing project. So it's been an eventful day.
I bet. Well, again, thank you for joining us. So anyway, we'll just get started. We're live right now. So those of you who've read the Green American might have seen that we have a digital exclusive story. It was also sent out with our email newsletter. That story was called Detroit Fights for Fair Water Access, and that piece featured our next panelist, who is with us now, Monica Lewis-Patrick. Monica is an educator, entrepreneur, and human rights activist who co-founded We the People of Detroit. So as such, she's one of the leaders at the forefront forefront of the water rights struggle in Detroit. And her group calls her the Water Warrior, which is on her official bio, which I love. So Monica, if there's a story behind that, you have to tell us. But in our article, we talked about her as part of a group of concerned parents who founded We the People of Detroit, but her background is so much richer. She has a master's degree from Bennett College in Liberal Studies with a concentration in criminal justice, sociology, and public management. She's an active member of the People's Water Board Coalition, the U.S. Human Rights Network, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and she was named to the World Water Justice Council in October 2015. She's the former lead legislative policy analyst for the Detroit City Council, and she's now We the People's president and CEO. So welcome, Monica. So Monica, We the People of Detroit, as we said in the article, Eleanor Green, who wrote it, is our associate editor. It started as a group of parents who were fighting austerity measures at their children's school. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you moved into water issues? Oops, did we lose her? Try that again.
Yes.
Okay, Monica, you bet.
Okay.
Did you hear the question? I got the bio out to everybody.
Yeah, I think I got the last end of it.
Okay, so you started as a group of parents, and how did you move to water issues?
Yeah, water for us became a primary focus when two things happened here. One was during the contrived bankruptcy in the city of Detroit, where we knew that the water was the primary focus of why they were taking the city into bankruptcy, was to seize and privatize that asset. But also for us, it became the purpose of a local activist by the name of Charity Hicks, when Charity was arrested for just alerting her neighbors and her friends that they were in imminent threat of losing access to water. And so for us, she was arrested and actually not just jailed, she was put in prison for a little bit over about 2.5 days. And so that became a personal assault on activists and community members. And that really just turned our whole world around. And what we had been doing around policy work and around education actually had to take a back seat to what we knew was the imminent threat of not having access to water.
Okay. So it's a fairness issue. You know, your biggest fight, the city shutting off water for residents, as you said. I think what people might not know, you think about that and you think, well, they can't pay their water bill, but these residents are really overburdened and there's a complete lack of fairness at play here. So can you talk about the injustice of moves like this, like what happened to your friend?
Well, I think part of the piece of it that gets left out is that the polar vortex that hit the city of Detroit and the region severely around 2014 was a record low in terms of temperatures. So when you're talking about a city that 40% of the citizens live at or below the poverty level, and then in the coldest winter in history, I think it was about, the record low was 26 degrees below zero. Many poor folks were having to make decisions between, do I increase my heat and gas so that I can survive the winter? Because they knew that they did not shut off water. At least it was the policy at the time that they would not shut off water during the winter months. So people were making these life and death decisions of trying to stay warm enough to survive the weather. And then the fact that they knew they were going to get hit with tremendous water bills and heat bills once the winter relief came in. And so with that, what we saw tens of thousands of folks really struggling with whether or not they were going to be able to make it through the winter, and then what was going to happen after the winter when they knew that they were going to be enormous rates that they were going to have to deal with. You had on top of that at the same time, you had 80% of the bankruptcy that was levied on the citizens of Detroit was on the backs of pensioners. So you had some of the oldest citizens in the city of Detroit actually losing 50% of their health care and losing over 22% of their pension. So these were numbers and dollars that they were counting on in their golden years to be able to care for themselves and meet their obligations. And now those things have been taken and stolen from us, in at least in our position.
Now, the UN had sent a special rapporteur to check out the situation. They talked about how this is a human right that's being violated. Can you talk a little bit about how losing water access impacts a family, how this is a human right?
Well, it impacts in multiple ways. The most important thing that we were working around is the fact that if you don't have running water in your house for 72 hours or more, you're in jeopardy of losing custody of your children. We also know that they have increased the criminality in terms of not having access to water. So you not only lose access to your children, you lose your property. They can actually impose eminent domain and seize your property if you don't have running water. So you can live in a house without lights and gas and there is no threat to you. But if you don't have running water, it's a direct threat. The other thing that we found out is that there has been, in 2015, our organization started a community research collective where we brought in researchers and academics from all over the country to partner with us so that the citizens could be assured that the things that we were seeing and feeling was validated and substantiated with science. And so we partnered with Global Health Initiative at Henry Ford Health Systems. And one of the things that we initially found is that there was an uptick in Legionnaires, there was an uptick in hepatitis A, there was an uptick in gastrointestinal infections, but no one was tie-barring that to the fact that there had been over 100,000 persons cut off, households cut off from water in the city of Detroit. So when we raised that question with the healthcare providers, nobody had thought about it. And part of that reason is 70% of the population that works in the city doesn't live in the city. So they weren't drawing the correlation. When we raised this issue with Global Health Initiative, what they did is they began to ask the question at the intake process, and we were able to correlate with about 37,441 patients that there had been a 1.5% increase in their illnesses directly related to their inability to access water and sanitation. And so that information was alarming to us because what we knew is that all of the entities and governance of the city of Detroit, as well as the state of Michigan, was suppressing this information because it didn't bode well with their comeback narrative. And so they were willing, and we even had people in private meetings tell us that they were fully prepared for the citizens of Detroit to die or to be sick because it was more important for them to be able to invest and have this infusion of dollars into the 7.2 miles of downtown Detroit. And so we saw that as just another attack and assault on low income and marginalized communities, that you have this narrative that some should drink and others shouldn't. And our position is that water is a human right and that every living being should have access to water.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a difference in how businesses and Black families are treated when they aren't able to pay their water bills. And so there's a real racial justice element here. Can you talk about that?
Well, what we have rolling out all across the state of Michigan, if you haven't heard of it, the emergency management law, which is called the dictator law, which sets aside democracy, which allows an appointed and selected individual, one individual, to hold all the power of a municipality. We saw it play out in both Flint and Detroit, where what we're seeing is a couple of things. You're seeing primarily Black and brown communities that are being totally marginalized in terms of their access. You're seeing in primarily Detroit and Flint, the harshest water shutoff policies in the state of Michigan are landing in these two municipalities. So out of 126 municipalities that get their water from the city of Detroit, you have policies that say that they can't shut off water to suburban communities. It doesn't matter how much they owe. Or you'll have another policy that says that they have to miss 3 billing cycles before they're even threatened with a water shutoff. So that means in predominantly white communities, they could go anywhere from 9 to 12 months before they even get a notice for shutoff. But in communities like Flint and Detroit, if your water bill is either 30 days delinquent or you owe more than $150 for that particular billing pay period, which is once a month, you are in imminent threat of losing access to water. And so we know that it is based on a deeply seated institutional racism that has had a long legacy.
Okay, Monica, it looks like we were having some technical problems and people weren't able to hear you. So I'm trying to figure out how much they might have heard almost the entire time. If someone from Green America can let me know quick what they did here, if you heard any of the questions, otherwise we'll have to backtrack a bit. None. Oh gosh. Okay, Monica, I'm so sorry. It looks like somehow I was the only one who could hear you. Is it okay if I backtrack?
Sure.
Okay, apologies for that because those are some powerful answers. Anyway, back to the beginning. So we, the people of Detroit, started as a group of parents who were fighting austerity measures at their children's school. How did you move into water issues?
Yes, we moved into the water struggle based on the fact that two things happened. One was the contrived bankrupting of the city of Detroit to seize control over the most valuable asset in the region, which was the Detroit Water and
Oh.
Sewage Department. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Uh-uh.
Okay, can you hear me this time?
I can.
And now I can't hear you. This is very strange. Okay, Kristen, my headphones are off. I am not sure what is going on that people can't hear you. We can hear you. Apologize, everybody. This was working fine with Catherine, apparently.
Catherine's so powerful.
We're just trying to troubleshoot here. Okay, Monica, I'm going to boot you back off. Hang on. And then try to bring you back on. Okay, Monica, can you hear me now?
I can.
I can hear you. Kristen, I know you're out there. Can you let me know if you can hear us both? No, Monica. Okay, I can hear her. I do not have my headphones in. I don't think that's the problem. Monica, well, I was going to say there's a little microphone below your picture. There's no line through it, I assume, because I can hear you. Okay, do you want to try talking again?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, how about that, Kristen?
Can you hear me?
Okay, can we call her?
You want me to call Kristen?
You might have to call me since I'm online. Hang on. Oh. 1 second. Okay, Monica, I'm going to jump off and let Kristen come on and see if she can fix this. And meanwhile, I'm gonna call you. So I'm gonna have her send me your phone number, and I'll call you and see if we can thread my phone through your phone through my computer. Hang on. Okay, Monica, can you try talking when I'm off and see if that works? Because I can just jump back off and on.
Okay.
So once I get off and you've got the whole screen, you try talking. We'll see if people can hear you that way.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better?
Okay, I think they can hear both of us now.
Oh, awesome.
So we will give this a try. Otherwise, I will jump off and then I'll just jump back on.
Okay, I was getting ready to say we can just always go to Miss Flowers. She's amazing.
Yeah, she is, but so are you. So I know people want to hear from you. And I'm just so sorry they didn't hear all the great stuff you were saying before. So anyway, back to that question for the third time. You started as a group of parents fighting austerity measures at your school or your children's school. Can you tell us how you moved into water issues?
Yes, we moved into water issues because of two primary factors here. One is that the city of Detroit was rapidly being taken into bankruptcy, primarily to seize control and to regionalize the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. And second, for us, that was more personal, is there is an activist that was from the city of Detroit. She's now deceased, by the name of Charity Hicks. And Charity was an international expert on water and food policies, but she was arrested here in the city of Detroit for just knocking on the doors of her neighbors to make them aware that they were in imminent threat of losing access to water. And she was then actually arrested and housed at the local prison here in the city of Detroit. And so we took that as a direct assault on not just women of color, but on an ally and a colleague here in the city. And so that really created a turn of events for us, because we could not rest knowing that this kind of activity was happening in our city.
Okay. And one of your biggest fights was the city, as you said, talking about your friend Charity, shutting off water for residents. What people might not know is how overburdened these residents are and the lack of fairness at play here. Can you talk about why this move is so unjust?
Well, it's unjust for multiple reasons. One is that during the bankruptcy, a major part of the issue that was raised during the bankruptcy was the fact that there was tremendous debt related to the water department. Well, in actuality, that debt was that was due over a 30-year period. But what they did is they collapsed it into a one moment so that over $50 billion would be owed that day. And that's how they justified the bankruptcy, saying that the city of Detroit could not meet its financial obligations to Wall Street. And then with that, they began this very vicious shutting off of water all over the city of Detroit. From the year of 2014 up until 2017, over 100,000 households have been shut off from water. But because the new construct of governance is such, it's really a pseudo kind of private entity. No one is any longer obligated to make the public aware of how many people have been restored. So we know how many people are shut off, but there is no obligation to tell us how many people have been turned back on. So our organization has sued over 8 times to just FOIA the information so that we can be more direct and clear on what that looks like in terms of the community.
Okay. People who have perpetual access to running water can often take it for granted. So can you talk a little bit about how having your water shut off impacts a family?
Well, it does several things. The most severe assault is the fact that if you don't have running water in your house for 72 hours or more, you're in imminent threat of losing custody of your children. They also use it as a way to seize property. They can declare eminent domain. So you can live in a house as cold as it can get in Detroit. You can live in a house with your children without gas and lights, but you cannot live in a house without running water. And then for the city of Detroit, over 40% of the population lives at or below the poverty line. So during 2014, which was a major period when the polar vortex really hit the citizens of Detroit severely. As a matter of fact, we had several days where the temperatures were like 26 degrees below zero. So for poor folks, they're making decisions between right now, in order to survive the coldness of the winter, I've got to bump up my heat. So they were increasing their heat and running their heat longer because of the climate impact, knowing that in the summer when they started water shutoffs again, that they all would be hit with these enormous bills for water. And so for a family that is struggling anyway to just put food on the table, you have a city that is majorly redlined, and for the majority of Detroiters, they're paying about 20% of their income to access water. But what we found out since 2015 is that we're also incurring a major public health crisis connected directly to the inability to afford water. And so you're looking at communities that once were very stable, now are enduring not only the inability to access the water, but now they're getting sicker.
And we were just starting to talk about this when we noticed that nobody could hear us. But there's a difference between how major businesses and Black families and white families are treated when they're not able to pay their water bills. And so this is a massive racial justice issue at play. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, what we found out is the majority of corporations that owe a tremendous amount of money for water. You've got the state of Michigan that owes the city of Detroit $5 million just on one property, another $2 million on a separate property, and the list goes on and on. You've got the Ford family that owed $55,000 on Ford Field. You've got the Illich family that owns the Detroit Tigers and the Red Wings. They owe $80,000 on Joe Louis Arena. All of those persons were allowed to renegotiate their debt or have their debt forgiven. But for the residents of the city of Detroit, what we're looking at is that if you are have a bill that's 30 days past due or more than $150 in terms of the cost of your water, then you're in imminent threat of having your water shut off. And we also have persons in the city of Detroit that have not owed a water bill at all, but they still are having their water shut off. And so our organization also has what we call the Community Research Collective, which does citizen science that we hold in trust for the community, but it's also tied bar to about 57 academics from all over the country. And one of the things we found as we did our research, Detroit provides water to 126 municipalities and townships. But out of all 126 municipalities and townships, Detroit and Flint are the only municipalities within that regional system that has the severe, violent kind of water shutoff policy. Many of these white suburban communities have policies that says it doesn't matter how much they owe, they cannot be shut off from water. And then others have policies that state they must miss 3 consecutive billing cycles before they're in threat of losing access to water. And so for us, it really raised the question whether this was ethnic cleansing and some form of gentrification to clear out Black and brown and poor folks from these communities that are sitting on the Great Lakes.
Can you tell us what are some of the worst things that have happened in terms of Black families who have been prosecuted or been come after for not having water?
Oh my God. We have seen children taken away and put in custody. We have seen elders lose their property because they also put liens on property, which means that houses that have been in families for 3 and 4 generations. Up until 1997, Detroit had the highest home ownership in the country. So for people of color, it really was a way of upward mobility, of being able to have a financial infusion and to anchor yourself. And so by losing something that had been so precious as to have a home and to own it has been devastating. And then you see on top of it, there was a collaboration between the city prosecutor and the director of the DWSD, Detroit Water and Sewage Department, to actually make it a felony if you turned your water on out of necessity. And so we had a group of over 9 activists, primarily white clergy, that put their bodies in front of the trucks that went out to shut the water off as a demonstration of humanity on behalf of the citizens of Detroit. And all 9 of those persons were prosecuted and actually looking at anywhere from a 5 to 10 year prison term just for them standing up for those that are considered the least and the lost. And they did that because there was a group of young Black men in this city that were prepared to put their bodies out in front of these trucks. And their fear was that those particular young men would either be shot and killed in the streets, or that they would receive an even harsher sentence if they had advocated for themselves and their community.
Wow, that's so hard to hear.
Yeah, the group, I just want to make sure people take note of the group. The group that did this heroic act is called the Homrick 9. So if you just Google Homrick 9, you'll find out that they have done, I believe, one of those acts of humanity that we all, from years from now, will be tremendously grateful for.
And how do you spell that?
It's HOMRICH, Homrick 9.
Okay.
Actually, the demolition company that was hired as a private contractor to go out and shut the water off, because Veolia has advised DWSD that they need to privatize the internal operations. And it's a way to create a disconnect between what was once municipal employees that would have never done this to the citizens that they are neighbors and friends with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, you know, there's some people might think, oh, you know, you don't have water, you can't, it's because you can't pay for your water, you couldn't afford it. But, and that's, you know, maybe they get blamed a little bit, but there's also predatory lending and illegal tax assessment at play here that made things very inequitable and hard for people. Can you talk about those two things?
Yes, we've been involved in several organizing efforts around what is happening with these austerity measures. One is that since 2009, over 100,000 households have been illegally foreclosed on. And there is a research project that you can go to. It's called illegalforeclosures.org. But there has been, we have done a long standing kind of collaboration with lawyers and with teams of researchers. And what we're finding is that the mayor here, Mayor Duggan, is very much aware that the hardest hit funds that President Obama allocated all across the country could have been used to pay back taxes and water bills so that people could stay in their homes. But those dollars have been diverted to actually finish the new Little Caesars Arena that's in downtown Detroit. So over $160 million was allocated for that. Over $400 million in the school aid fund was allocated for that. So they're using public dollars for private interests to fill the coffers of millionaires and billionaires. And then the other piece that I think was really critical that we discovered during this process is that there has been so many layers of austerity built into the emergency management policy. A lot of people don't know there are 37 states across the country that have some form of emergency management on the books. And if you're not aware of what the emergency management policy is, it allows them under this governance structure to set aside democracy, to actually put all of the elected powers of a municipality under the control of one individual. So this is where you see in the case of Flint, there was a poisoning that happened because they were actually more concerned about paying Wall Street than they were about the health and welfare of the citizens. The same kind of culprits that played that particular game there are playing that same game here. It just, as I say, it's a shapeshifter. It takes on a different form. It takes on a different look from community to community, but the players are the same. And so what the plan is to gentrify the city of Detroit, and water is the quickest way to move us out of the city.
Wow. And I don't mean to say that a reasonable person would say, oh, people can't afford to pay their water. I was just thinking of the more extreme people who might hear your story, because it's awful all around. And it just, you know, my point was that it gets even worse, and there are no arguments to be made for any of this.
No, not at all.
No.
And there's no reason for it, because the truth is, under the bankruptcy, the debt that Detroit owed that was just primarily related to its water, could have been restructured. They opted to leave the water system, which was the largest asset that we own. They intentionally left it out of the restructuring during the bankruptcy in order to move it toward regionalization and privatization. And so at the same time, they were telling Flint that they could drink from a river that if you just looked at it, you know it wasn't fit to drink from. They also were aggressively shutting off anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 people a week here in the city of Detroit. So it's vulture capitalism at its best, to create a crisis or to take advantage of a crisis in order to exploit it for capital gains.
Vulture capitalism. That's a really good way to put it. Let's take it in a little bit of a positive direction, because your work, I think, is a big positive. What progress have you made, and what are you working on now?
Well, we just finished, as I said today, a citizens-based water testing project that we're doing in collaboration with Michigan State University. Our research collective found that when you partner with state-funded institutions of higher learning, that the governor can seize that data. So we do all of our projects in collaboration with institutions of higher learning outside the state of Michigan. We have about 57 researchers and about 18 different universities that they're affiliated with that are part of what is called the We the People of Detroit Community Research Collective. We have a youth component that we're very proud of. We have graduated over 33 young people through what we call our social justice internship, where these young people are using their visioning, they're using their art and their music and their creativity to uplift these kinds of injustices. And then I would say our third piece is that we are disheartened by the fact that we still have to deliver water, because what we do is we also run the Detroit Water Rights Hotline, and we have what is called water droppers that deliver water, because the city is so massive. You can actually, it's about 139 square miles. So we deliver water to those that have transportation barriers, or families that may have several children, or to elders that may have some ailment or disability. And so we're very proud of the fact that we have been able to stay connected to what I consider the humanity in the community. These are the people that are getting up every day, working 2 and 3 jobs, taking multiple forms of transportation just to get out of the city to a job. I'm very proud of the work that we do with our comrades and colleagues in Flint around creating what we consider the beloved community. And then the work that we're doing not only nationally, but internationally. We just partnered with 3 professors from the University of Puerto Rico. We've also done some work with Palestine, because many times what we're seeing play out is a lot of the policies that are in place in Palestine that is denying them access to water. Some of that same legal language is being used to build policies here to deny low income and people of color access to water.
Mm-hmm. Wow, okay. So we are over our time. I want to make sure people have time, those are still with us, can ask questions. So I'm going to turn to, we do have a question from Kathy. What is the best thing non-Detroit residents can do for you to help with your work?
Oh, I love Baltimore. Yeah, well, a lot of our work is similar to what's playing out in Baltimore. What we would love for people to do is definitely follow We the People. We have Facebook. We are on Twitter. We have a website, We the People of Detroit. You can definitely support our research collective, our youth work, our emergency water relief. We are getting ready to actually replicate the water rights hotline in Flint, because the governor is getting ready to shut down the 5 remaining pods there. That's a part of the emergency relief there. And then I think it's about us telling our own story and uplifting each other's story. I definitely am talk about Baltimore in terms of what is happening there around unaffordable water and what's happening around the displacement issues of people losing access to land. We talk about what's happening in Puerto Rico. That's become a major uplift for us. But it's about the intersectionality and the intentionality of us uplifting our humanity and weaving it back together, because it's truly been destroyed. But what we say here in Detroit is that we've deputized ourselves. We're not waiting to be rescued. We're looking to be part of our own solution to save ourselves. And so I hope what you will do in Baltimore is connect Detroit's story to Baltimore. We'll continue to do the same about uplifting Baltimore with Detroit's story. But it's about the fact that we're all obligated to make sure that we all have the human right to water. It's non-negotiable for us. We believe, even people we don't like personally or politically, we stand on the frame that water is a human right.
Absolutely. Kristen asked the question that I left off of my list. So is there any hope that the situation is getting better?
Yes. The hope is the fact that you just had a Catherine Flowers on, who is doing tremendous work in Alabama, and her work is definitely connected to some of our elders and leaders here in Detroit, Michigan Welfare Rights and the People's Water Board. The fact that you have people in Flint who are dealing with personal illnesses and sickness and disease, and they still are getting up and mobilizing themselves to weave this story all across the country. You now have this global presence where who would have thought a little short, fat girl from Tennessee would be connected to global policies and having these broad discussions on a global scale. So to me, that is our hope. And when we look at our children and we look in the faces of our children, we have to know that we have to paint a picture for them that they not only do we have solutions, but they have solutions. And so with that, I have so much hope that we will resolve this issue in our lifetime, because it is connected to our humanity and our survival as a species.
Absolutely. Well, our friend from the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake in Maryland also sent the same question that they asked Catherine to you. Can you share what, if any, role the faith community has played in strengthening you personally and or your work for environmental justice?
Well, I would say for me, in terms of the work that we do, some of the most amazing work has come from people like Pastor Bill Weiler-Kellerman and Pastor Ed Rowe and Pastor Roz, who runs a food bank in Brightmoor on the west side of Detroit. And the fact that they have been so intentional about not only using their spiritual platforms, but also their bodies as a shield for communities of color, because Pastor Rowe and Pastor Bill are both white men. And what we know is in this racial construct that we deal with in this country and on this globe, on this planet, to have white men speak to the issue of institutional racism and speak to inequity is a major platform for them to use on our behalf. And then I think the fact that they were willing to risk jail and incarceration to stop those trucks from doing the kind of violent shutoffs that they did. And then I know for me, faith is a major part of how I'm able to keep getting up every day, how I'm able to encourage myself to keep doing this work, because we have many sad days and many disheartening days when we look at the devastation that is played out on people that are already marginalized, that are already struggling with multiple issues. But what we know through our faith is not only faith, but it's hope. And so we have the hope of restoration. We have the hope of creating a green economy and being able to build out our water infrastructure in a way that's equitable and it's just. And so if I didn't believe those things, there's no way that I'd be motivated to be able to continue to do the work that we do. But I have the faith that the more people that come on to this work, the work that is being done through the Green America right now in terms of uplifting this and sharing this with all of you is a major part of pulling us all together. And we don't have all the solutions. We believe we have a piece of it, but we believe it's through our collective work. It's through the cooperative work that we're going to be able to get there. And so, yeah, I believe it's going to happen. And I believe it's going to happen in our lifetime.
Oh, that was a beautiful answer. Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Monica? I don't think I see any more coming in. So Monica, thank you. I was a little bit jealous of Eleanor getting to talk to you, so I'm really glad to have the chance to talk to you today. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for all that you do. We really appreciate it. We appreciated being in the article. Eleanor did an amazing job and just have become a big fan of the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're fans as well. Same for us, and more so even after today.
I know. And just to be able to come on with the Catherine Flowers is just amazing.
Yeah, I get both of you. That was really cool. All right, speaking of, I'm going to bring Catherine back on just in case anyone has any other questions. So a big thank you to you, Monica, and we'll bring Catherine back on quickly. Let me see. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, I have invited Catherine. I don't see any yet, but hey, Catherine.
Hi, and I have to likewise talk about those powerful people in Detroit. You know, Lowndes County's history is tied to Detroit because when Lowndes County was involved in the voting struggle years ago in the 1960s, and people were evicted from their homes and had to live in tents. The tents came from Detroit. And a lot of people, when doing the Great Migration, my family included, left Lowndes County and places like that throughout the South and ended up in Detroit. So our struggles are connected on so many different levels. And there's some very, very powerful people there that I draw a lot of inspiration from. And it was a pleasure for me to be able to share this platform with Monica. Yeah, it's just awesome. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you for fitting us in. It was really a pleasure to talk to both of you. I mean, I enjoyed working on that article, and this is just made me a bigger fan, just like with Monica.
Well, you all have to come and visit us and see firsthand, because I think it's very important to lift up the voices of people that are sharing, that are having these experiences, because this is one way in which others who are not there can see and feel, you know, what others are dealing with on a regular basis. And I agree with Monica, you know, the right to water and sanitation is a human right. And we should not be debating this at this particular time in history.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. We did have one question from Setonia. The Green American article about Lowndes County mentioned that many African American and low-income residents didn't get access to running water until the 1990s. Can you speak to the history of Lowndes County and why that happened?
Well, Lowndes County's history is pretty deep. It actually goes back before the Civil War. Lowndes County was founded by people from South Carolina. Lowndes County and Alabama was founded by people from South Carolina who were looking for soils. They had worn out the soils with cotton, and they were looking for places to expand not only their plantations, but slavery as well. And they went to the Alabama Territory, and eventually Lowndes County and places like that were founded. And I also have to mention that I work for the Equal Justice Initiative as well, and we're actually going to be dedicating a memorial for lynching victims. And a lot of those lynching victims came out of Lowndes County. It was interesting that we have this Monica and I are both on this webinar together, but one of the people that was killed in Lowndes County during the voting rights movement, which was later, was Viola Liuzzo, who was from Detroit. But because of the history of Lowndes County was about slavery, and Montgomery factored into that because it was one of the principal places for slavery at the end of when the Constitution ended the importation of slaves from other countries. They started one of the big markets was in Montgomery, and people ended up in places like Lowndes County. And the way they controlled the labor was through a lot of oppression. And there was never a structure in place that dealt with the equitable distribution of resources. And Lowndes County in the 1960s organized the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was the original Black Panther Party, and ran a slate of candidates after the passage of the Voting Rights Act to challenge the access to those offices that control the policy on a local level. So as these structures were broken down, then more structures were put in place. And we see that being played out today, you know, really nationally. Alabama is in the news right now. So those kinds of things that you see on a national level that's being played out, those things happen when we talk about water and sanitation too. So I grew up with an outhouse part of the time. I remember we not only had we didn't have access to water and sanitation, We also didn't have telephones. I remember when we first got telephones. I often used to wonder when I was a young person, why were we left behind? And I'm seeing that in other poor rural communities around the country that they had similar stories, but especially in communities of color, and especially in those communities of color where people struggled against the inequality, then the repression was even harder. I think it's akin to the benign neglect that was put in place on the Johnson administration, when they neglected cities that rebelled because of the inequalities that were taking place there. And we're still dealing with vestiges of that right now.
Okay, right. Wow. So it looks like that was the last of the questions. Let me just double check my other screen to make sure nothing came in by email. Okay, yeah, no, that's it, Catherine. So thank you so much for making the time for us, for getting your flight in early and everything. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your interest, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to work together on solving these problems.
Absolutely. I'd love to stay in touch. I'll see you on Facebook.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.